And welcome to this edition of V Radio and Liberty Unleashed. I'm your host, well, one of them, V Radio, also known as Neil Kiernan. Today we've got an excellent show lined up for you. Right, Brian?
That is correct. Welcome, everybody. I'm your host of Liberty Unleashed, Brian, and I don't have a cool radio voice like Neil, but, I'll work on it.
Someday. Just someday.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, very interesting show today. Obviously, in the news, the last day or so, a couple of days, has been the what's that called? The sentencing of those conspiracy guys from the January 6th in 2020. If you remember, I'm sure you do, Neil, because you did a documentary that we're going to be watching some of today. This was a whole riots, or as the media likes to call it, a violent insurrection that happened at the Capitol.
Right. Not an uprising. You see, an uprising is when you go into your city and destroy large quantities of private property and hurt people who have nothing to do with your grievance. Then we call that an uprising. Or rather, that's what Black Lives Matter calls them.
You're right. Nonviolent protest.
It's a fiery but mostly peaceful protest.
Right.
I mean, like, if you never need any evidence that there's no Antifa at January 6th, it would be that they didn't light anything on fire. So,
yeah. Now, a little backstory, I guess, if there's somebody out there who's been under a rock for a while, we're obviously talking about January 6, 2001. And this was the result of Donald Trump versus Joe Biden in the elections. Of course, we know how that turned out. Trump lost. Biden's now our president. Biden won the popular vote with 51% and what was 81 million votes and some change. Trump ended with 46%, about 74 million votes and some change. But many people, including me, had a hard time believing that 81 million people showed up to vote for Joe Biden. Of course, Neil, you've heard the narrative that they didn't show up to vote for Joe Biden. They showed up to vote out Trump. So it had nothing to do with wanting Biden in. It just was Trump out. But of course, many people think election fraud took place. And you and I have been doing politics for a while. And, a couple episodes ago, we did an episode about election fraud. And I think and we weren't talking about a particular election, so to speak. We were just talking about in general. And of course, with, voting machines. But I thought, given everything that we presented and know that the probability of election fraud in this country is very high, that there's no doubt that there's mischief going on when it comes to the elections. And for me personally, I thought that the Joe Biden-Trump election, and I think both of us can say that neither of us are Biden fans or Trump fans. So this is, I guess for us, we're not sitting here like we want Trump in. So we're not in any way supporting him. But I can't speak for you, but I think you questioned it as well. It just seemed odd that 81 million people showed up for this guy who barely campaigned. And he didn't win a lot of states in terms of the electoral college goes either. So I guess, on January 6, 2001, a mob of Trump supporters went and protested. They started, I guess, January 5th and were protesting at the Capitol. And their attempt was to keep a joint session of Congress from counting the electoral college votes to formalize Joe Biden's victory. Now, there's all kinds of claims throughout this, like the media claimed 5 people died as a result of this protest. Tucker Carlson reports that there's no evidence that 5 people died. I know some police officers committed suicide after the fact, but there's been no evidence that I've seen, or Tucker Carlson as well, that suggests that they did during this whole violent insurrection. And according to Wikipedia, Neil, 138 police officers were injured during this protest. And as I said, that 4 police officers committed suicide. So this was, I guess, a call to action by President Trump and thousands of his supporters gathered at D.C. on January 5th and 6th to protest the election results.
Right.
Did I do that backstory? Did I get it about right?
No, I think you basically got it. Yeah. I was watching, or rather, that's the first thing I want to show, obviously, is I was listening to Trump's speech live when all that happened, because I had a feeling something weird was going to happen that day. And I'm glad that I did because I caught a rather relevant part of it. I think it's interesting that the media is suddenly interested in the plight of police officers if they're getting hurt by right wingers. Nobody wants to hear anything about the police officers if they're getting hurt by Antifa or BLM rioters. But it's important if for some reason conservatives did it. It's just a common problem. So, but I guess now we're gonna be talking about the sentencing. I guess we're gonna do some retrospect, just playing a little bit of my documentary on this topic. It wasn't just on this topic. It was called Insurrection. Hindsight is always 2020, and it was kind of a play on words to the fact that it was comparing the 2020 riots of like BLM to the January 6th riots, and kind of trying to draw a comparison in those two things. Um, you guys can check it out. The funny thing about this one is, it was another one of the ones where I had to kind of fix the sound on a little bit, and I've noticed that the video just keeps degrading. It looks like it's 30 years old, and I don't know why. This is one is also normally completely like you have to like log in to watch it because of the violence in it, and I mean I can't really blame them. I do use a lot of raw footage here. But were you ready to go ahead and have a listen, or there's more you wanted to say?
A couple more things. This is, the show's a result of recently, it was the Proud Boys, members of the Proud Boys who were sentenced. As we look at it, there was Dominic Pizzola, who was sentenced to 10 years. Zachary Rael was 15 years, and Joseph Biggs, 17 years. And we're going to talk about our feelings on the amount of sentence they got. There's two other people, and I don't have their names in front of me at the moment, but I'll get that while we're doing the documentary. But their sentencing didn't happen yet. So in total, 5 people from the Proud Boys have been or will be sentenced for their involvement in January 6th. So, that's obviously part of the backstory here and what we'll be discussing after your documentary. So go rock and roll.
All right. So, leading up to this, I go ahead and play it, but like, this is the key thing that I think that stuck out in my mind when I was watching this live, and it's also a part of his speech that doesn't really get any repetition and certainly didn't get any during the January 6th hearings.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
So that's what he told everybody. Make your way over to the Capitol to peacefully and patriotically let your voices be heard. And they tried to suggest that that's inciting a riot. And later in the documentary, I say, well, if that's inciting a riot, let me, what are these? And I have like all kinds of different examples of BLM and Antifa just openly saying, yes, we're violent. Yes, we're going to be violent. Yes, we need to be violent. Defending violence, advocating for violence. And yet for some reason, that topic is never brought up. In addition to the fact that Antifa openly states that their goal is to overthrow the government. And for some reason, the only time that anybody might ever say something, or rather, the only time that anybody on the other side of this says anything about it is to suggest that somehow this quote unquote insurrection was an attempt to overthrow the government. Like literally the day after this, Antifa posted flyers in Portland with a burning White House on the image, and it was basically that they actually attacked, ironically, DNC headquarters. And like it was because they were being anti-Biden. So anyway, did you have any comments, Brian?
No, you can go ahead and launch that video and we'll discuss everything afterwards.
All right.
So those are the words that he said during the live broadcast I listened to, that I was kind of surprised we're not really getting a whole lot of play as far as to how people remembered what was said. Instead, what people are suggesting is that he asked for people to violently essentially take over the government or engage in insurrection. And honestly, I guess it's more contradictory to me because over the course of the year, we've been told over and over again that any violence or looting or destruction that takes place when the left is protesting is completely outside of the boundaries of the responsibility for the left as a whole. That only the extremists do these things and that they don't represent the majority. So here we have Donald Trump specifically calling for peaceful protests at the Capitol in an effort to try to pressure politicians, which is basically what you're supposed to do in a democracy. He didn't ask anybody to harm anyone. He didn't ask anybody to do any damage. But it's being suggested that the extremism in his voice or the persuasiveness of the way he went about talking about his concerns about the integrity of the election alone somehow make him responsible for all of the violence. So now let's talk about what took place after Donald Trump's speech, wherein he had suggested to his followers that they peacefully, quote-unquote, go to the Capitol and voice their displeasure with their elected officials as to their lack of confidence in the outcome of the election. To understand what took place, you're going to have to first of all recognize that the Capitol building is a big place, and therefore the police in question were asked to cover a lot more ground than they ever feasibly would have had the personnel to handle. This led to misconceptions like the idea that the cops just simply let them in. And at some of the entrances, they did, and it's because they were grossly undermanned and outgunned, and really the only other choice would have been for them to simply be stomped to death by the mob. In other places, there was a pitched battle, including what looks an awful lot like a medieval siege in a tunnel that went on for 30 minutes. I'm not going to play all of that video, but I can make it available to you if you want to see it. But suffice it to say, there was, I guess you could say, layers to what was taking place in the Capitol, from the bizarre to the outright violent, and in some cases, deadly.
Police are squabbling with protesters. Oh, there we go. And they just breached the Capitol again.
People were wondering how the Trump protesters were able to get in so easily. Of course, their buddies on the police department helped them in.
This is looking at inside. Look at this. These protesters are inside Statuary Hall right now. You see the statues. This is a moment I never saw in my life. These individuals just rushed through security. They are inside Statuary Hall. This is a legendary place where all of us who've covered Capitol Hill, it's hard to believe what we're seeing right there. They're just walking through. Where are Capitol Police?
So again, that went on for, at least in the video that I watched, about 30 minutes. And I would like to take a quick moment to address my associates on the left. For those of you who make idiotic requests like that police should not be allowed to have riot gear or riot shields, I would ask you to consider for a moment, the fact that you were probably very comfortable with what you saw in that video only because of the fact that the police were fighting people who you consider to be your political opposition. But this is why riot gear exists. If you see people suggesting that the cops didn't fight and that they just let them in, say something. And if you're one of those people, please stop. If you told anybody that that's what happened, go find that person and tell them you were wrong.
Million of us out there, and we are listening to Trump. You're the boss. It's sad. It's sad. Let the people in.
Hey, it's safe for you guys. We know you guys. Take it easy. And away.
Showed up! Where's the rest of everybody? There's not enough of us. They're going to bring the vets in or something. Where the fuck are they? Where are they?
While we're here, we might as well set up a government.
Hey, let's take a seat, people! Let's take a seat! Hey, Nancy Pelosi. Let's vote on some shit!
We're not gonna fuck this Nancy. We pay for it. This is our house.
No, this is our chair.
I agree with you, brother, but it's not ours. It belongs to the Vice President of the United States when he's in here. It's not our chair. Look, I love you guys, you're brothers, but we can't be disrespectful.
Don't disrespect.
They can steal an election, we can't sit in their chair.
No, we're not putting up with that either. Look, it's a PR war, okay? You have to understand it's an IO war. We can't lose the IO war. We're better than that. It's information operation. We can't do it. I want to let's get a snap of that.
Hey, how did I get down there?
Go down the stairs.
And look here, look.
Ted Cruz's objection to the Arizona.
Objection. He can sell us out all along. Look. Objection with the county. We're not gonna fall, man. Hey, we're not gonna fall. glad to see you guys. You guys are fucking patriots. Look at this guy. He's got covered in blood. God bless you. You good, sir? Do you need medical attention?
I'm good, thank you.
All right.
I got shot in the face. I got shot in the face with some kind of plastic bullet.
Any chance I could get you guys to leave the Senate wing?
We will. I've been making sure they ain't disrespecting the place.
Okay, just want to let you guys know this is like the sacredest place.
I know.
Hey, no, and I'm gonna take it. Chair.
I want to pause it for a second to kind of make a note of the fact that you see how we're talking about essentially two very different environments. Like, here we have a cop who's talking to them like, can I just get you guys to get out of the Senate? Almost like, I don't know, a substitute teacher dealing with some unruly students, but meanwhile, elsewhere, you had like a pitched medieval battle in a tunnel. And that's one of the things that made it difficult and still does, just like the Rittenhouse incident. Like, people keep like, spitting out things that are not true about this. But what it amounts to is that, well, the cops just let them in. That didn't happen everywhere. It happened in some places, or the cops didn't fight them at all. Well, those cops in that tunnel battle looked like they were fighting to me pretty brutally, actually. So the problem is that both things are essentially true simultaneously. That, like, essentially, if you could say half the January 6th was like this, then the other half was like that, you're not making an accurate statement. But it's a big place, But then they were going to put this guy away for years, and he's obviously just kind of a goofy guy. And Tucker Carlson's reporting more or less proved that he didn't do anything to deserve to be put away for years. Did you have any comment on what you saw so far, Brian?
It's amazing. Obviously, we're doing this because of the sentencing of the Proud Boys that recently happened, but seeing the QAnon shaman there, and mentioning Tucker Carlson, out of the mainstream media, he was the only one who was willing to, I don't know, I guess, tell the truth about it or present a different viewpoint than what was out there being presented. Everywhere you went, that's all it was talked about. This violent insurrection. I mean, they said it so many times that I think everybody who is a normal mainstream media sheep just started repeating it. Like, everybody just now calls it a violent insurrection. It's amazing.
Right. And I wanted to give a shout out to WYSIWYG TV, who's actually in the audience today. He was actually present that day. If Wizzy, if you like, I sent you a DM on Discord. You're free to join us. It'd be cool to have your perspective since you were there. But anyway, so that was, like, it kind of gets to the point of what I wanted to cover mostly. It's just that there's many different layers to this situation, and I didn't actually end up playing it, but like there was another example where like they constantly try to say that this was some kind of white supremacist, like racist riot. But there's a moment in that tunnel fight where a black Trump supporter got knocked unconscious, and his fellow Trump supporters very carefully picked him up and moved him to safety. It's like, that's not the environment either. Blacks for Trump were present. When I did my episode debunking everything's going to be all white, I showed that there were people of like every race represented on January 6th, but that doesn't fit the new we need an evil white supremacist Nazi boogeyman narrative, So,
well, and
but
out of all the Proud Boys that are being charged. So I mentioned I didn't have the full list. So it was Dominic Pizzola, Joseph Biggs, Ethan Nordine, Zachary Rael, and Enrique Torrio. Enrique is definitely not a white boy, and he's a Proud Boy member. So, to make your point there.
Right. Enrique is definitely not white.
Right.
But that's never been enough for them. But you got to remember that they can repeal your black card anytime they want. That's how they operate, or they'll say you have some kind of internalized racism or something like that. But the theme wasn't racist. Nobody there was there because they were racist. They were there because they supported Donald Trump, and they were concerned that they were getting screwed out of their election, and we discussed different anomalies and all that. But to me, my investigation of that began during the primary. It was before any of this other stuff. Like, that's, Joe Biden wins the primary in states that he had not even campaigned in. And like the weird, conspiracy essentially, because that's what it was. Obama basically gets on the phone and tells all of them to drop out except for Elizabeth Warren, who they were going to leave in so that she could help divide the progressive vote, and allow Biden to surpass, Hillary, but or not Hillary, Bernie. Um, but at the same time, there were anomalies there as well because the exit polls did not match what the computers brought back. But all of that, when it comes to a primary, what's made worse in this situation is that it's actually not even illegal for them to rig primaries. And there was a lawsuit back in 2016 filed by Bernie supporters because of what had been revealed by WikiLeaks and such that the primary had been interfered with by the DNC, and the DNC defended themselves in court by saying, we're actually allowed to pick our candidate any way we want. We could draw names out of a hat. Like these are all like from court transcripts, and it's largely because people don't realize that the political parties, all of them, they're all private entities. They're not directly governed by the Constitution. Yet they wield enormous power over our democratic process of choosing our representatives. They wield enormous power that was never intended when they were drafting the Constitution. In fact, the majority of the founding fathers were against political parties altogether. But anyway, so they're concerned about their election, and another interesting point, and I should have brought a clip up for this, was that because like at the time I didn't have that on hand, but like that is being brought up was that there were riots when Donald Trump won in 2016. Antifa and all of them showed up, burned stuff, and destroyed stuff. But the common lie is to suggest, well, the left doesn't do that when we lose elections, and I'm like, you did that even after you won. Still there, Brian? Looks like you're muted.
Yes, I'm still here. I'm sorry. I am muted because I'm worried that my microphone isn't the one I want to use and that it's picking up all this other audio out there. Yeah, and the founding fathers didn't trust a lot of things, including big government. Interesting point back then, and it was set up that the office of the presidency was not supposed to be that important of a role. And the first couple presidents didn't campaign. It was actually looked down upon to campaign. You were acting beneath yourself to go and campaign for president. As it progressed along and the need for power, as government always does, they started to find ways to make the office of the presidency seem more important, more powerful than it really is. So fast forward to today, and we act like having Biden or Trump is the most important thing out there in the world. And it really isn't. When you look at the limitations of the president or what the office of the presidency is supposed to be, they really don't have that much power. And you go and you watch social media and everywhere right now, obviously it's campaign time. So Biden and them are out there talking about how Biden created all these jobs. Biden reduced inflation. Biden did this for healthcare. Biden's looking out for the middle class family. Biden and the presidency don't have any ability to do that. It's like Biden, they credit him with the Inflation Reduction Act. Well, obviously that's Congress who has to write the bill. Biden just says yay or nay to it when it hits his desk. So nobody's questioning it though. Like, the Democrats are just out there the same way. Like, yes, Biden did all this. Biden created 170,000 jobs. Biden reduced inflation. Biden. And, the office of the presidency is not meant for that. That's not what it does. And that's not the power that it wields.
Right. And that's really, it's interesting how often we talk about this all the time, back in the day, was that frequently people don't even know who their congressman is. They don't know who their senators are sometimes. They definitely don't know any of their local politicians, like their sheriff and such. They probably didn't even occur to them that they vote for their sheriff for a reason. Things like that. And we've talked about that many times. So I guess, Brian, you had the article. Do you just want to go ahead and pull the article up as far as like the sentencing of these Proud Boys?
I didn't have the article. I had actually Twitter comments on it, but I will, while you play the video, bring the article up, and when we do another pause, I'll have it ready for you.
You got it. Well, I guess we'll go back to the video. Here we go.
I'm not one to
He's doing the right thing. He's obeying his oath. I'm making sure you guys don't do anything else. Now that you've done that, can I get you guys to walk out of this room, please? Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I would greatly appreciate it. Hey, come on, man. I feel like you're pushing the line. Hey, come on, man. Come on, man.
This is our capital. Let's be respectful to him. There's 4 million people coming in, so there's a lot of control. We love you guys. We love the cops.
It's only a matter of time. Justice is coming.
All right, come on. Over 4 million people are coming everywhere, all the way back to the monument. All DC.
Jesus Christ! We invoke your name! Amen! Let's all say a prayer in this sacred space.
Thank you, Heavenly Father, for gracing us with this opportunity. Thank you. Let me take it back. Thank you, Heavenly Father.
Amen.
For this opportunity to stand up for our God-given unalienable rights. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving the inspiration needed to these police officers to allow us in this building, to allow us to exercise our rights, to allow us to send a message to all the tyrants, the communists, and the globalists, that this is our nation, not theirs, that we will not allow the American way of the United States of America to go down. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent Creator God, for filling this chamber with your white light of love, with your white light of harmony. Thank you for filling this chamber with patriots that love you and that love Christ. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent Creator God, for blessing each and every one of us here and now. Thank you, divine Creator God, for surrounding and filling us with your divine, omnipresent white light of love and protection, peace and harmony. Thank you for allowing the United States of America to be reborn. Thank you for allowing us to get rid of the communists, the globalists, and the traitors within our government. We love you and we thank you. In Christ's holy name we pray. Amen!
Amen!
He said, "Hey, women." Viewer discretion advised, folks.
Shots fired! Shots fired!
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election.
So I want to pause it there because also, like I said, the 5 people thing, that was like old information. I made this documentary a while ago. But that was the death of Ashley Babbitt, an unarmed protester who broke through a window and was going to try to get to the other side, who was just shot, just gunned down. You know, you have to ask yourself, can you imagine like what would happen if an unarmed BLM, or Antifa rioter, just got gunned down by a cop like that? What the reaction would be, and instead what you get is, all kinds of trolling, saying things like Ashley Babbitt got what she deserved or whatever is generally the attitude of the left. Like they're all about, people getting shot by cops as long as they don't agree with them.
Right. It's amazing that I've seen that plenty of times where she got what she deserved. And I can't put my head around that one on somebody dying to treat cops like they're judge, jury, and executioner. And that was okay in our society is just beyond reproach.
Well, the theory that I have heard was that supposedly Mike Pence was pretty close by and that's why the Secret Service did that. I don't know. It's been a while since I looked at this. I'm sure we probably have more information on it now. But it doesn't change the fact that, again, what do they think she was going to do? Like, like just one woman coming through. More probably would have come after her. But again, I don't really know exactly like what can, basically condones that level of force escalation instantly. the guy didn't even try to keep her from getting through the window. I don't know.
Right.
You know, but it's definitely a scenario where the way it's always looked back on, you know, is that the same people that would whine because, say, Jacob Blake, who was a rapist, who was violating a restraining order that his victim had against him with an active warrant against, active warrant for said rape, was resisting arrest with the police, with police with a knife in his hand, and then got shot in the back while trying to leave with her car with her kids in it. You know, that was something that we needed to burn down, the city of Kenosha for, because after all, he was obviously a model citizen, which is why he was a sex offender, who got shot. And honestly, as I've said many times before, if he had done that to my daughter and violated the restraining order and had a warrant on him, he wouldn't have gotten shot 8 times. He'd have gotten shot once, right in the head. It's amazing to me that that person is deified and they'll say his name, and he wasn't a good person at all. And a lot of, people who get shot by cops that the left deifies were not. Go ahead, Brian.
I was just thinking, I was laughing, thinking, listen to you saying this person shouldn't have got shot, but I'm a vigilante and we'll do it in a second.
Well, it depends. Is he going to show up at my daughter's door?
Right. Yeah, I got it. I just, I don't know how many other people will.
Right. So, but, after that, Trump told everybody to go home. Unfortunately, my video quality is crap again for some reason while playing videos. I don't know why. I keep having this problem. Strategic has this problem too, and I haven't been able to fix it. But essentially, though, Trump tells them to go home. Trump at no point ever told them to be violent. And he said, we're going to go to the Capitol to peacefully and protest, basically to peacefully and patriotically let our voices be heard. And there were people who were doing just that. And I wasn't able to find the footage again, but there were people who were literally just, peacefully protesting outside the Capitol. And, at one point somebody started breaking something and those people started yelling at the person to stop. So again, there were so many different faces of what the protest looked like, depending on where you happen to be at the time. So did you get that Twitter feed up?
I got it all up, man. That didn't sound
Awesome.
right.
It's not that kind of show, Brian.
Right, exactly. And you won't let me have a OnlyFans page for the show, so
No, not for us. You can have one on your own.
Right. So I saw, the comment there. Obviously, somebody was saying, people wouldn't do this for George Bush or another president, and they did this, so it's got to be Donald Trump's fault in some way or another. First of all, times are completely different. Back then, if you mentioned the shadow government or the deep state, you were pretty much considered a conspiracy theorist, and most people didn't believe that it exists. We're talking like during the George Bush era. Fast forward to now, and people use the deep state like they've always known it's been there, and it's some common thing, common knowledge thing. Trump also ran on draining the swamp, and that was very important to a lot of people. Obviously, that terminology, draining the swamp. When you look at it, Neil, you got independent musicians like Oliver Anthony and Tom McDonald who are writing these songs, and they're getting hundreds of millions of views on them, and their songs are just talking about how the system is messed up, the system is broken, that Tom McDonald said the system's working the way it's supposed to, which is to screw us, basically. These kind of songs used to not resonate with that kind of number of people, and now they are. The term draining the swamp and deep state used to not resonate with that many people, and now it is. I think people are more awoke to the fact that we are being lied to, that the media is fake news, the mainstream media is fake news, and that the government in no way has our best interest in mind. George Bush obviously lied about weapons of mass destruction, never apologized, never acknowledged it. So of course people aren't going to show up and do the same thing for him. They don't look at George Bush and Donald Trump as the same thing. This is guy who said he's going to drain the swamp and get rid of all this corruption in DC. And that's what everybody was cheering and voting for him for. Now, whether he achieved that or not is not the point of this show, and we can do that on another show. But the sentiment, what he was saying, and the way people felt about what he was saying was real. I mean, I'm not a Trump supporter and I want the DC swamp drained. So, there's a big difference in who you're going to show up for and why you're going to show up for them. I think in this case.
I think honestly, really what it comes down to is that Republicans, they didn't want Trump in the beginning, to begin with. It really comes down to the fact that, they would have loved to have done to him what the DNC did to Bernie, but he just flat out told them, if you don't treat me fairly, I'll run third party. And you and I both know the Libertarian Party would have fallen all over themselves to have Donald Trump on their ticket. So he would have gotten on all 50 ballots. He would have been a serious problem.
The money they would have raised.
Well, right, exactly. The Republican movement, would have been in a lot of trouble. They would not have been able to beat, Hillary at that point, because it was close enough as it is. But the main point is that, they wanted to get rid of him. And then when they got him in, they were kind of hoping that maybe they can get what they wanted out of him. But when I was working for Jesse Ventura's exploratory committee about when he was thinking about running for president last time, he said, I want to run against Donald, but I got to give him credit for something. And I was like, what? He's like, he didn't get us into any more wars. And I honestly believe that that's why somebody like Liz Cheney is going to speak out against Trump. It's going to be because he didn't go along with them. I honestly believe that the plan in 2016 was for Hillary Clinton to get elected and then to invade Syria. And
hopefully provoke Iran. I think they were hoping to provoke Iran or find a way to lie about Iran like they did with Iraq.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's largely what I think was happening. And the funny thing is that Curtis Press actually reported on this, that Biden's first day in office, he had 400 troops and armored vehicles in Syria securing a oil field. And if anybody needs that link, I'll be happy to provide it. But I would agree with XL, in over his head and failed to realize that that's what happens to a lot of people. You got to remember also, he wasn't a career politician. So, but at the end of the day, the real thing that he did, because when Liz Cheney decided that she needed to turn on Trump, she had voted in favor of basically everything Trump wanted, literally until the last second. And then it comes down to, well, we can't seem to get this guy to invade countries, and we neoconservatives need that. So I guess we better turn on him then, and it was amazing how the left just lapped up and kissed her feet, oh, you're so stunning and brave and amazing. She's so she has so much integrity, and she's really just trying to push for the Constitution. And I'm like, bitch, you're talking about somebody that helped her dad write the Patriot Act. Are you kidding me? You're talking about somebody who literally helped her dad write a book to excuse torture and to say it's slanderous to say that torture, that waterboarding is torture. That's all things she did. And all of her positions are all things that the alt-left wants people canceled for on a regular basis. She's pro-Israel. She's anti, assault weapons ban. And just to be clear, I'm also anti-assault weapons ban. But the point is that she's literally nothing else to that. But Trump derangement syndrome is so powerful that it was like she had been baptized by John the Baptist himself. All of her sins are forgiven because she talked shit about Trump. That's how the alt-left treated it.
I think he wouldn't play the role of their puppet. And to sum up what you're saying, that's the impression I got. And that's how I felt about it with the way they were treating it, with so many Republicans, or should I say neocons, the war hawks, turning on them. Yeah, no new war was very important, and obviously very important to the American people too. And, as the quote says here, we'll be celebrating in Tehran by next year for John Bolton. They wanted that. They want war. They love the military industrial complex. And I think that Trump wasn't willing to play their puppet on a lot of things. And including, as we talked about, I think the last episode, it was fun to watch him in the press conferences when he'd be like, nope, not answering your question. You're fake news. There's nobody else in the history of the presidency who did that. They all put on their suit and tie, and went up there and acted like they respected everybody and we're going to treat everybody fairly and answer the questions. And Trump was like, no, you're fake news. Get out of here. You're fake news. Get out of here. And I have to admit, I love that part. I thought that was great, calling it out as it is. I think he could have called out a couple other as fake news that he didn't. But hey, we have some disagreement there, Trump and I. But at the end of the day, my point is he wasn't willing to play their puppet. And by not playing their puppet, this is what he got. This is what came out of it.
Right. Well, yeah, and that's always going to be a problem. And as Ron Paul found out, Tulsi Gabbard found out, Mike Gravel, Dennis Kucinich, if you are anti-war, you are public enemy number one. Like, that is a great way to be sure you destroy your political career. And it doesn't matter where you're at, what position you're in, they will turn on you, because being pro-war, when you consider, as Mike Gravel, the late Mike Gravel, pointed out, that they are the most powerful lobby in Washington, the military-industrial complex,
Yes.
that they, and they're making absurd amounts of money in Ukraine right now, and, in fact, when you think about it, that war is immensely profitable because it's pretty much just us shipping them, endless disposable items. I mean, we're talking about actually sending them real vehicles now, but my point is like, especially when they were sending them all those rockets and stuff, I'm like, wow, whoever manufactures those shoulder-mounted rockets is going to be making tons of money, because that was basically the whole Ukraine defensive for a while, is we're just going to use these, fire and forget rockets over and over again. I'm like, yeah, man, I should have bought stock in whatever company was doing that, right?
Right.
But anyway, and I maintain for a while, though, I don't talk too much about Ukraine because it's almost impossible to get good information about it, and I don't think we'll really have the truth about what's going on over there for generations, if ever. But again, it all comes back to the same pig trough. And Glenn Greenwald has been reporting now recently on how the neoconservatives are essentially like he took one of them, and I forget the guy's name, but like he went back and showed articles written by this guy that were super right-wing conservative sounding when he was in Bush's White House. And now he's writing articles that are super woke and, like super left-leaning. And of course, well, who's he working with now? Well, now he's working with Biden. When George Bush and Dick Cheney and that whole administration decided to support Biden, I immediately knew something was up. I was like, what the hell?
Right. When you look at this, and I'm going to post some stuff that went on social media here soon with this. We talked about in the past voter fraud, and that's, I think, where this whole thing stemmed from. But I actually think it's deeper than that. I think it's much deeper than just voter fraud. I think when you go back to the swamp, when you go back to being lied to by the government, when taxes are the way they are, when you don't really have a say, it's just like they want you to believe you have a say in what goes on. But once they get elected, they do the opposite of what they say they're going to do. It's not just about voter fraud. But voter fraud has probably been going on in this country for, at least as long as I can remember. So it has to have been going on longer than that. And people, they don't seem to want to accept it. They still go out and cast their vote as if it means something. And any time you bring it up, you're basically accused of being the one who voted for the loser. So
Right.
In this case, you and I are not Trump fans. And as I said at the beginning of the show, I think that we could even see that there was something fishy going on here with the election. And, we don't have all the evidence presented on a podcast like this to prove it. I think if that kind of evidence exists, either we would have been gunned down or, the media would have buried it. So I don't think it's worthwhile to even bother with that. When we did our episode on voter fraud and electronic voting machines, as it was said, like, not only can they be hacked, but they were hacked and they continue to be hacked. So, if you can't believe that there's even a probability of voter fraud, that's saying something, because, that probability exists in every country that's supposed to be a democracy, that will always exist. As Stalin said, it doesn't matter who casts the vote, it's who counts the vote. And so, going back and looking at that, obviously voter fraud was one of the biggest things here. But I think overall, it's just that there's a line now in the sand of people who want American values back. They want that concept of freedom and individual liberties back. and a group who seems to have a lot of money, backing, and power, who want this big centralized government in control of your life and every aspect of your life. And that's where I think the fight is really at right now and what this is about. Also, I mean, I don't know if it's just me, but I cannot look at this as some violent insurrection. I don't know how you feel about that, but for the whole time, I've just laughed every time they brought up and called this a violent insurrection. It made me laugh. This wasn't John Brown's war. This wasn't like the Harper Ferry raid. This was, I don't think anybody showed up with actual weapons that I know of.
No, they didn't actually. And that's, so basically, and I've given this on my show before, but what it amounts to is this. Like, let's just go scorched earth. Let's just be of the absolute worst possible scenario, right? Let's just say that they went in, they and like Pelosi and all them were still there. I mean, and like I said, we're going to go scorched earth. They kill every government official in the building, right? Let's just say that happens. And the country doesn't just magically change hands. Like, it doesn't suddenly mean that Trump gets, like, the government, the police, they don't all just turn in Trump and go, oh, well, I guess you're still in charge then. I mean, we're not Klingons. Like, you don't get to, like, just, take over the government, because you killed whoever else was in charge. Like, it just doesn't work. It's not real, and in addition to that, no, they didn't bring any real weapons. They had flagpoles, and that's another reason why it didn't really look very pre-planned. It looked like kind of reactionary.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking of voter fraud, it's obviously right now accused of being just a Republican thing. Only Republicans think that voter fraud happens. But this came up recently where a Democrat county supervisor in Hines, Mississippi, is challenging his party's primary election results after discovering massive election fraud. He says, we have videotapes of someone going into boxes, bringing in thumb drives, bringing in ballots to be inserted into the machine. The person he's talking about is the Hines County Democrat Party chair. If you watch this presentation, it sounds exactly like what happened in the 2020 election, the 2022 election in Arizona. If Democrats are rigging their own primaries, imagine what they're doing in the general elections. Now, we've discussed this. We know that they're a private party. They can do whatever they want in their primaries. They proved that to us. Biden being their nominee proved it. Mitt Romney and McCain being the nominees in the past have proved that they can rig their primaries. I don't even think it's rigged at this point. It's just their party, their rules. I mean, you show up at your house, Neil, for a party, and you say, alcohol welcome, and then an hour later you say, you know what, no alcohol. Nobody can sue you or do anything. It's your house, your party. You say, this is my rules. I decided that everybody's got alcohol, get out and leave. It's not even so much rigged as it is their party, their rules. They do what they want. The problem is they try to give you the illusion like you have a say in it. And I think that's where everybody gets frustrated with that process. And we're talking about the primaries, of course, here, and the parties. But in this case, my point is it's not just Republicans who are calling out voter fraud and wrongdoing. We've got Democrats here also that have an issue with it. So, take that for what it is. But hey, again, if you can't even imagine that voter fraud is even a probability, I don't know what to say to you.
I do want to read this real quick from Exel Wright. January 6th was as close to an insurrection as an army of 7-year-olds with Nerf guns declaring their fort as their own country.
I mean, and that's how I look at it. But if you go on social media, obviously everybody who is, I would say, a Biden supporter is parroting that line that it's an insurrection. Now, whether they actually believe that or they just feel like they can parrot it long enough to get their candidate to win again and then they'll back off, I don't know. But I just have this feeling that they tend to really think that's what a violent insurrection looks like. And it has to make me laugh because, again, I mean, you would know a violent insurrection when it happened.
Oh, well, yeah. In addition to the fact that, like, it, and I remember asking somebody because, like, the people talk about QAnon, there's also Blue Anon, and meaning people just believe just absolutely crazy stuff. And I have a friend of mine from real life, as in not on the internet, and because he was like, well, we did almost have
you have friends in real life?
Yeah, I do. Wow. And he was like, well, the Border Patrol was set to become Trump's, Gestapo and help him take over the country. And I was like, what? Like, and he honestly believed that. Like, and he's not a stupid person either, but like they have this whole pipeline about how they thought the whole thing was going to go down. And it's crazy to me, but at the end of the day, it was a day where some bad things happened. I don't support any violent activity, ever. It doesn't help you. The fact, for example, that now we get to listen to them complain about January 6th literally every single day is an example of what violent activism does for your cause. It never helps. It always causes problems.
Right.
And that's why I said, at this point, man, did you ever just walk straight into the Patriot Act? Like, good job. Now we can go ahead and label anybody who has an ideology similar to yours as a domestic terrorist, which is exactly what they're trying to do. Violent activism is always a trap. It's not just a matter of whether or not it's moral. It's not effective. And social sciences have understood that for a long time. And that's why, for example, the BLM went from 70% approval down to 30% after the riots. It doesn't work. So, but the only people it does work for would be authoritarians who want to scare your group of, people into accepting more and more draconian measures to be able to go after people for protesting or just holding an ideology that is not friendly to authoritarianism and labeling them as terrorists. Do you remember? God, I think we did an episode about this back in the old North Virginia Patriots show, but like there was some kind of police flyer that people had gotten their hands on, and it was like to help you identify domestic terrorists.
Yeah,
and libertarians. Libertarians were listed as terrorists.
It was Ron Paul supporters, libertarians, anybody who had like a bumper sticker or a sign that supported the Constitution and more so the Second Amendment.
Right, exactly. And people with American flags now, like they're going after people with American flags, and that's anybody who has one, by the way. A Bernie supporter showed up at a protest once, and Antifa attacked him, like literally made his head bleed and everything. They really messed him up. But so the point is that anything that looks like patriotism, and when you study Yuri Bezmenov, he was actually interviewed by G. Edward Griffin, by the way. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I did not.
Yeah, so G. Edward Griffin actually interviewed him. Yeah, and he said that that because G. Edward Griffin asked him, well, what's the solution? What do we do about this Soviet subversion in our country? He's like, well, patriotism is the cure, right? So now we need to demonize patriotism as much as possible. And like I assume you saw the one about the kid, for example, who got removed from class for having a "Don't Tread on Me" flag on his backpack. Did you hear about that story?
Yeah,
that just happened a little while ago, and they played the video, and it was so pathetic because the teacher was like, "Well, we had to remove him because that's a symbol for slavery." I was like, "What?" It was like that was like the first colonial flag. Like, what are you talking about? I was just like.
I actually saw people on the left on Twitter defend the kid, and I was surprised about that. Like, they had to correct the teacher. Like, no, this was not about slavery.
Well, no. We had a "Don't Tread on Me" flag at Occupy Flint, literally hanging and flying when it was appropriate to fly it. Like, that's
right.
It's not a right or a left thing. It's a liberty thing. Like, it means don't tread on me. Don't tread on my rights. So anyway, do you want to go ahead and get into what you brought up?
Yeah. So again, we talked Dominic Pizzola, Joseph Biggs, Ethan Nordine, Zachary Rail, and Enrique Torrio are the 5 Proud Boys. 3 of them have already been sentenced, and 2 of them will be sentenced. Ethan Nordine was one of the 5 members convicted of spearheading an attack, as the article words it, spearheading an attack on the U.S. Capitol to try to present peaceful transfer of power from Donald Trump to Joe Biden after the 2020 election. He is the undisputed leader on the ground of January 6th, said prosecutor Jason McAuliffe. The Seattle area chapter president was one of 2 Proud Boys sentenced Friday. Dominic Pizzola was convicted of smashing a window at the U.S. Capitol in the building's first breach on January 6th. He defiantly raised a fist and declared Trump won as he walked out of the courtroom after being sentenced to 10 years in prison, also among the longest sentence in the January 6th attack. Now, I guess the record or the longest sentence goes to here, Stuart Rhodes. I don't know if you remember him from the Ron Paul days, Neil, do you? He was a pretty big deal back 2008 to 2012, Stuart Rhodes.
I think I've heard the name before, but I don't remember who it is.
He started the group, the Oath Keepers.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so, and, back then, I mean, I didn't follow it. I know who he was, and I didn't follow the Oath Keepers, but back then they were not labeled as some far-right extremist group. But again, most people don't understand libertarianism. So if you're not left center, if you're not left or in the center, you're either right or far right. That's what you get labeled.
Well, no, it's worse than that. If you're not in the upper left-hand corner, you're far right. Because somehow people can vote for Bernie Sanders and still be far right. Tulsi Gabbard is still somehow far right to them.
Somehow far right.
Joe Rogan is somehow far right to them. It's a tiny little cult, and you ain't in it.
Right.
Anyway, go ahead.
So Stuart Rhodes got 18 years, but that happened a while ago. So he's not part of this sentencing. And these guys were sentenced on seditious conspiracy. It was the charge. So it wasn't like assault. They weren't sentenced based on a charge of assault. Obviously, murder wasn't one of the charges. B&E, nobody talked about breaking and entering as one of the charges here. For his own part, the 33-year-old, I lost my place here. So we had Stuart Rhodes. Nordine's words online posting grew increasingly violent leading up to January 6th. On the day he led the group of nearly 200 men towards the Capitol, then moved to the front of the mob and helped tear down a fence, allowing rioters and protesters onto the ground to confront the police, according to court documents. I want to point out that this whole protest, this whole organization, they actually had their permits pulled. They did it the legal way. They pulled the right permits and had permission to do these what was supposed to be a rally at this place. And me and several others did the Revolution March in Washington D.C. So I can tell you about the process of pulling permits for a rally when you want to use the Capitol grounds. Since we started our march at one place and ended it at another, just like these guys did, you have to go through the DC police. You have to you have to pay for it too. You have to pay for the cops who stop the traffic to allow you to walk down the road as part of your rally and protest of whatever you're doing. You have to pay for your permit. There's a lot of things that you have to pay for on there. You have to have porta potties set up there. I believe back then you had to have one for every 100 people that you thought were going to be at your rally. Maybe one for every 1,000. I forget the actual numbers. So they actually pulled the permits. They didn't just show up there all of a sudden and just start this process. They did pull the permits. It's never mentioned in the news anywhere, by the way. Okay. So who else? Pizzola said, they say Pizzola took the officer's riot shield and used it to smash the window, allowing rioters to make a breach into the Capitol. And he later filmed a celebratory video with the cigar inside, prosecutors said. He was a recent Proud Boy recruit, however, and a jury acquitted him of seditious conspiracy. He was convicted of other serious charges, and prosecutors had asked for 20 years. Now, the Department of Justice and the prosecutors were asking the judge to give these guys a lot more sentence than the judge gave them. And it's not a surprise that the government wants to punish you as much as possible if they think you're against them. But the judge, for the time that these guys got, the judge was saying that he backed down from what he was being asked to give them. Okay. Right. So moving on, this article actually sucks. I wish I would have found a better one because this isn't fun to read. But what we'll do here as we move into this. So right now, Dominic Pizzola got 10 years, Zachary Rael got 15 years, and Joseph Biggs got 17 years. Okay. Now, this is a Twitter post, and this is what I've been finding from the left on social media. It says, I wonder if the Proud Boys are proud now. Goes over the prison sentence, and it says, this is Brian Krasenstein. I think you know who he is. You comment on some of his Twitter. Make no mistake about it. These are bad people. They were convicted by juries of their peer for crimes which have maximum sentencing guidelines in the decades. I support law and order, which includes people who commit crimes, are convicted of those crimes, and are sentenced for those crimes or having to serve the time they are sentenced to. You can pretend that I am a bad person for supporting law and order, but it's usually the bad people who do not support law and order. John Cooper goes on to say, Proud Boy leader Joe Biggs called into Alex Jones' InfoWars show last night to complain about his 17-year prison sentence. Joseph Biggs was a producer or something for Alex Jones. I forget exactly, an editor. He did something with Alex Jones before this, and he used, Alex Jones a lot to help promote the Proud Boys. But he called into Alex Jones' show saying his main hope is for Trump to win the election in 2024. I know he'll pardon me. I believe that with all my heart. Biggs also complained about the quality of prison food. He then asked people to send money to help support his family, whining that the government took away his military pension as part of his sentence. Boo fucking who, am I right? So This is sorry, I guess the screen share wasn't working on this. I apologize, people.
Yeah, it's fine.
But anyway, there are screenshots here. So that's what the left is saying. Now, a couple libertarians came out. Hannah Cox, who does the podcast Based, she commented on Brian Krasenstein's post and says, if you think nonviolent people should be locked in a cage and abused for over a decade because you don't like their politics, you are an evil person. Get help. The correct response here is that this is inhumanity, shouldn't happen to anyone. And then Dave Smith, the other libertarian comedian, goes on and says, it is insane and so downright evil to cheer a 15-plus year sentence for anything other than murder, rape, horrific assault, child abuse. So, I mean, I take the position of Hannah and Dave here. I feel that this 10, 15, and 17-year sentence is way extreme. There's a nonviolent crime from everything that I've seen here. And that there's no way that they should have that long of punishments. And I think, again, this is the government trying to make example out of people when it comes to that. What do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting that at the same time, as I pointed out, Antifa says they're trying to overthrow the government. And somehow they get cycled in and out of prison, usually, prison. They're frequently released and rearrested sometimes in the middle of riots and then released again. Like that happens in some municipalities in the United States. And there's no way that the FBI doesn't know it because Antifa is not really careful about telling people that that's their intention.
Didn't Antifa have a riot in D.C. about Donald Trump and burn a church or something?
Yeah, we talked. Yeah, that was actually when Donald Trump got elected, they showed up and did all kinds of crazy stuff. As Wizzy's pointing out, I'd love to see Brian say the same about the violence that's gone unanswered from the BLM activists. He's not talking about you. He's talking about the person you were reading from. But the point is that there's definitely a weird double standard about this sort of thing, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the upcoming election because they're obviously so desperate that, to try to prevent Trump from being eligible, that they're doing everything in their power, and ironically, that reminds me of the people who were like obsessed with trying to suggest that Barack Obama, didn't have a proper birth certificate or something. It's like, just win the freaking election. If the only way you can stop Barack Obama is to bring up whether or not he was born in Kenya, then you need to work on your policies because people didn't vote for Barack Obama because he was born in Kenya. They voted for him because of the policies that he claimed that he was advocating for.
Right.
And the same thing goes with this. It's like if you're trying to disqualify Trump, just by never endingly trying to charge him for crimes over and over again, if it doesn't work out for them, that's the funny thing. With the way the Trump movement works, all they're really going to do is galvanize his support and make him essentially more powerful. It's like Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. You can't win, Darth. If you strike me down, I'll become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Well, the media claims, and I guess some of the posts were taken down, that Biggs particularly had blog posts and videos where he basically said after January 6th, get your guns out and clean them, buy more ammo, buy survival food. There's a civil war coming. Things are going to get worse before they get better. And when you watch the left report this, they report it like saying something like that is the be all end all to prove that this guy was some violent person who was there at the Capitol to commit violence. I feel like this is a sentiment amongst a lot of people, not just Trump supporters, that, at some point things are going to go down in this country. And, I think in some ways that they're trying to incite people. You just talked about that. I think that's part of the plan, that they want things to go down. They want the unrest. They use unrest to usually try to get more control. You squash the uprising and now you have more control. You can violate, you can get rid of the Constitution at that point. You can say, see, this document here didn't do shit, so we don't need it, tearing it up. And all you people who had guns, you're a violent insurrectionist, and now you got to go to camps and nobody can own guns, and everything that they'll do if they were to ever come out of that on top. So yeah, I think that's part of their strategy, is to incite the Trump supporters and to get them riled up.
Well, when it comes to when an authoritarian thing happens, there's usually some way to try to get consent, from the people in question. I made a Star Wars quote earlier. That was the whole plot of the Emperor, was to get everybody to go along with the idea, well, we shouldn't have this democracy. We should have a galactic empire for a safe and secure future. It's the same nonsense. Like, one of the things I remember during the course of the BLM riots was that moderate Republican friends of mine, like people who maybe voted Republican but really had no other involvement, who would have been aghast at the notion that we should just round up protesters and send them to some like Guantanamo kind of place. Over the course of watching all the rioting and the Chaz Chop and the burning and all that stuff, those people were slowly getting radicalized to the idea of, what, we should just have a government crackdown, round all those people up and send them somewhere. That's the effect that this essentially has. And then, especially because, if they can get the right to go ahead and do the same sort of things, then you're going to have people more comfortable with the idea of arresting them, and throwing them in secret prisons. That was one of the things that they would keep trying to do over and over again. Like, we used to cover this all the time in North Virginia Patriots, was like, the Patriot Act was bad enough on its own. There were other things that they wanted in it that would have been far worse. So they would try to sneak them into like other, legislation, like the Military Commissions Act, like they would try to, or in like budget proposals, they would try to put quote unquote anti-terrorist, stuff in there that would allow them to do this or that. And it's like, there's still plenty of stuff in the Patriot Act that's active now, if I remember right. For example, like, we read over it on an old episode where we read the part where it gave the executive, meaning the president, the power to declare someone a terrorist without any due process, to be able to take, like, basically to be able to seize their property. Like, that was all in the Patriot Act.
Right.
And that's before we even get into any of this other stuff. And that's why I tell people, it's like, the problem with the whole Civil War dialogue, okay, and I say this as somebody who did get armed because I am concerned about unrest, is that we can't have a civil war in the way that people understand what a civil war is supposed to be. Our situation in this country doesn't really account for that, because we don't have states that are just entirely on one side of the issue or another, right? There's no lines to be drawn. Every state in the union has a division of half, well, not necessarily half, obviously some are more blue, some are more red, but they all have citizens of both persuasions. Like, I think what will end up happening is not going to be a civil war. I think that they're going to try to goad the right, into becoming terrorists, and that, and then be able to then, as a consequence, declare anybody who's pro-Constitution, pro-freedom, just like we saw back in the Ron Paul days, that police report suggesting that if you were a Ron Paul supporter, you might be a terrorist, right? And then the left has been essentially falling on their sword about this too, because now, anything that might have been associated with anything that Bernie or any other, leftists who at least tried to say they gave a crap is also going to be associated with violent, activism. And there's plenty of evidence laying around for that, right? And that's why I say people need to be mindful that you're being provoked. You're being provoked. That's what all of this is. They want you to go do something. And that's why whenever one of these incidents happens, you notice that the mass shootings, that the media just shows up and immediately goes, oh God, I hope it's a white guy and a conservative. Oh, that would be great. Oh, wait. You mean it was a black man who drove his car into the Christmas parade and he had a bunch of anti-white, black supremacist stuff on his Facebook? Oh, well, yeah, we better never talk about that again. But the
Right.
Buffalo shooter, he identified in his own manifesto as a left authoritarian. Now, he was racist. He was definitely racist, and he was definitely a nationalist, but he wasn't a conservative. And Rolling Stone went out with an article saying he's not a lone wolf gunman. He's a mainstream Republican, which was just a fabrication. It was a total lie, right? They're hoping for it, folks. They need another 9/11 kind of thing to be the way to convince everybody that maybe you don't need as many liberties as you need safety.
And they did that. They were very close to successful with that with COVID, for sure. And again, I think you've answered the question, but you definitely don't feel that the sentences that these guys got was fair or just, that they should not be sentenced for that long. I guess my question to you would be, how long should they have been sentenced for, if at all?
Honestly, I mean, I didn't look really closely at what the individuals did. When the QAnon shaman was going to be put away for years, that guy didn't do anything to deserve to be put away for years.
4 years,
I mean,
it's
honestly, I don't even you could arrest him, but I mean, you're talking about what, community service or something? I mean, if you just took the rest of the riot out of the situation and just evaluated him on his own, what did he do? He walked into a building, sat at Nancy Pelosi's desk.
He was escorted. He was allowed it.
Well, right. That's true too. Yes, the police escorted him. My point is that even if you were to try to frame it as entirely let's just say he did everything that he did. What are you talking about there? Misdemeanor? I mean, I don't know the laws. The point is that I don't think he should have been put away forever. Like I said, maybe some probation, but he wasn't some violent extremist.
When I was doing research for today's show, going back to some of the old news from that, there were people who on the left, particularly, who were calling for him to be shot. He committed treason. He should have been shot. I can't.
Oh, well, yeah, and they defend Ashley Babbitt's being executed by cops. They defend it all the time.
Right, exactly. Looking into this, breaking the window of the Capitol and climbing in any normal case without a bunch of protesters there, you would be sentenced, given something. My guess is not even a year in prison. You'd probably be given some kind of probation and community service for doing something like that without all those protesters there. Add all the protesters there, I don't think it should add any more to the sentence or the punishment. Clearly the one guy was shown breaking the window. I guess that was actually on video. The other guys, right. Aside from showing up and being the leaders of this and getting the people to rally there, I haven't seen what they actually did. I mean, there hasn't been any evidence that I've seen where they actually did. And that's what's surprising me about everybody on the left's reaction, like cheering and treating them like, yeah, you get your 15 years. And I'm like, for what? And their response is like violent insurrection. And I was like, who did they beat? Who did they kick? What did they do? Did they grab a baseball? No, man, they stormed the Capitol. And I was like, 1,000 other people did too. Why are these guys getting 15 years and nobody else? And is that really a 15-year punishment? No, man, it should have been worse. It's like, wow.
Did you ever look into because I know you were new to some of this, but the Ray Epps guy who was just in the crowd. Tomorrow we need to go into the Capitol, right? And he's never been arrested. He's never been, they say he's not a Fed, but he literally was absolutely inciting them to go do that. And the funny thing is, even the crowd smelled it and they started cheering, chanting at him, Fed, 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 because it was so obvious, But again, there's a funny moment where I think it was Cruz was talking to the FBI director about January 6th. And he asked him a bunch of pointed questions, like, can you tell me how many agents were present in the crowd? Just different stuff like that. And the FBI, person kept saying, I can't answer that. I can't answer that. I can't answer that. Which indicates, well, yeah, they were definitely there, right? And then you get the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping. It's the same thing. So whereas agents essentially said, "Hey, why don't we go kidnap the governor?" Right? So that's why I'm telling the right, this is a very important time for you guys to use restraint and be extremely cautious with anyone that is suggesting anything to you that is untoward. And the reality is this: we don't really live in a world anymore where you could have some kind of a violent revolution unless you had the full support of the military and the police.
Well, the amount of
There's really no way to make it work anymore. We don't live in Minutemen days. What were you going to say, Brian?
the amount of underground operation you would need to pull that off before the federal agencies came in and raided your operation, to get that many people behind you and in support of it, and get away with it before you were raided would be that's a logistical nightmare.
Well, right, and we also just don't live in that world anymore. Like, it's the technology that allows people to, I mean, surveillance technology, all of that stuff is so much more powerful than it used to be. That even trying to lodge something like, say, the French Resistance would be extremely hard, like basically impossible, really. In a world where people's cell phones are spying on them the whole time, like all the different stuff that Snowden revealed and such. And so I'm not saying, if the country turns fascist and evil, that you just lay down and take it. What I'm getting at, though, is that you've got to remember that for them to succeed in their goal, they have to get the support of the common people. And the best way for them to go about doing that is to demonize anybody who opposes them. And if you give them anything to justify that, and this is the reason, for example, why when we were at Occupy, we always did press conferences after Antifa and BAM, which is basically the militant, more or less the equivalent of the violent BLM movement that you see now, which not all BLM people are violent, just so we're clear, but BAM basically sounds exactly like the violent militants that you see now. But anyway, like, they tried to stop me when I passed a resolution at Occupy Detroit that we would denounce all violence because they want violence. They think this is their opportunity. And it's just a ridiculous, fantasy. It's just as bad when Antifa, like, I remember arguing with an Antifa guy once who said that he's been fighting the most militarized police, in history. And I'm like, bro, you're throwing bottles at people with guns who have been ordered not to shoot you. I'm like, you're not a violent insurrectionist, but they are deluded into believing that they are. That's what's messed up. So that's what I said. It's like, yes, by all means, arm yourself, get anything you need to protect your family, but do not give into this because it's a trap. They are hoping you'll get violent. They're begging you to.
I have a natural thing that when I don't know too much about something, I just see what other libertarians are saying on social media, and I'm like, well, that must be it. That's good enough for me. And that started off this way with these guys that were sentenced recently. At first, I saw all the left cheering it. The right was somewhat quiet, just like, damn, man, that's harsh. And the libertarians are the ones who came out and said, this is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I was like, yeah, what they said. And then, of course, I started looking into it, doing the research for this show. And, again, libertarians usually have it right. Very rarely do they have it wrong. They pay attention, I think, to the details a lot more than most of the average voters on both sides, the left and the right. And they generally obviously look at it from the point of view that I like to look at it from, which is a pro-liberty, a pro-freedom point of view, and what the role of the government should be, and how and when the government should be punishing its citizens, those kind of things. And, we have a lot of people in this country in jail for nonviolent offenses, for victimless crimes. And there's, the right has long supported the war on drugs and locking people up for doing drugs. You often see the news, even the left leaning news still supports it. Like when they report somebody got caught with like a pound of marijuana or a kilo of cocaine, they talk about it as if this is like the worst thing ever somebody could do in life, is to walk around with that amount of drugs on them. They don't mention that nobody was hurt, killed, or otherwise affected by it. This guy was just walking around with it. When I say walking around, I don't mean literally walking around.
Right.
But, throughout that, we have, when you look at the war on drugs, it's created a lot of people in jail for nonviolent crimes, for victimless crimes. They got the war on poverty. They've got the war on terror, which now includes domestic people. And, the government has this constant war going on everywhere, a war on this and a war on that. And, they have civil asset forfeiture where basically the cops can take your money or your stuff and then you don't necessarily get it back ever. If you're traveling down the road with 10 grand in your trunk and get pulled over and you're in certain states and the cops just confiscate it, it's theirs. And so when I say that these things that are going on with like January 6th and this country as a whole, it's obviously a lot deeper than just Donald Trump. And that's been my point. I think everybody wants to paint it as you're just a MAGA supporter. Oh, you're just a stupid, you're just sitting there admiring Donald Trump. And I think there's a lot more deeper frustration than that in America. And things like January 6th reflect that. Again, anybody who's showing up saying freedom, we love freedom, go America, and they're labeled as the bad person, they're labeled as the rioter or the terrorist. That's scary because that's the antithesis of America and what we're supposed to be. When you show up and scream freedom, everybody's supposed to cheer and say what that guy said,
Right.
not lock him up for 15 years. So, I think there's just, it's, as I said, there's so much deeper going on in this country. We're not the land of the free like we claim to be. And so people are feeling it. They want to be patriotic. They want to look at that flag and salute it and say, that's my country. But all this bullshit that's going on is just driving them nuts and driving them to this point of wanting change at any cost. And you have the right to petition your governments for grievances, redress of grievances. The question is, what happens when you petition that government with your grievances and they don't respond to it? They laugh at you. They send you away. Do you walk home and just say, oh, well, I tried? Or what do you do next? And I think January 6th was a result of what happened next.
Well, and they felt that, again, they honestly believed that the election was being stolen from them, so that at that point, any authority that was opposing them would therefore be illegitimate. That's the situation, the dicey situation that turns up anytime you essentially have treason going on, sedition going on, is it's really going to come down to, well, who won? But again, the thing that occurs to me and that I would tell the audience is, can you imagine what our political situation would be if January 6th had not happened? What would they be talking about at that point?
Yeah,
because
the left would have nothing to say on Twitter. They would just say, MAGA sucks, MAGA sucks.
Right. Well, that's the thing that I usually point out to people is that if you bring up the January 20, I'm sorry, the 2020 riots, the whole freaking summer of them, right? Over 600 riots in 1 year. Then they'll say, well, that's a whataboutism. I'm like, no, you don't understand. That happened first. And it happened a lot. And it went on for months, right? Your obsession with a single day of violent protest, that's the whataboutism. At that point, you just look ridiculous.
Right.
It's like you're obsessed with this one day of unrest, but you had nothing to say about the 600 riots in 2020. And that's not a number that is made up. That's real. The statistics are there. And, and that's why I said, at that point, essentially the right took a huge hit by giving in to, and basically giving up their position of being the ones that were for law and order and civility and all of that, and I hope that people learn from it, and again, I'm right there with everyone else. Like I said, arm yourself, be ready to protect your family, but very carefully consider what you're doing. And if somebody's suggesting to you something ridiculous, like say kidnap Governor Whitmer, what did they think they were going to get out of that? Right. But was there any end game for that would have been beneficial? Do you think it would have changed anything in the state of Michigan? And I say that as somebody who lives here, right? So use your freaking brain, right? Like, what are you thinking? Like, what are you going to accomplish? Even if you had succeeded, what are you going to accomplish? Like, that's why I said to people, it's like, because people ask me, it's like, well, how can you use the V for Vendetta moniker? Now, that guy was a revolutionary. I'm like, yeah, when you're in a real, absolute fascist situation and there's no other choice, then by all means, right? But in the meantime, don't volunteer yourself to become the example that they give other people when they're justifying taking away your civil liberties.
Yeah, you lead me to the bliss says they can't stand Antifa, BLM, or the January 6th rioters. They all need to be held accountable. I can't stand the rioters either, but again, look at what we're saying here, that people are getting fed up with stuff. Police brutality
Right.
has been the cause of Antifa and BLM, or at least that's what they're claiming. And police brutality is something that does happen. It's in this country and it needs to be addressed. I don't feel like the rioters need to be held accountable as much as the government does. And I think the rioters are a reflection of frustration that the government isn't being held accountable. And so, I mean, when I read comments like that, like hold these people accountable, are you suggesting that we don't hold the government accountable, that the government can just go in and arrest and incarcerate whoever they want for whatever they want, and that's fine? Again, I'm not supportive of Antifa or BLM, or at least that what they've turned out to be. If the whole cause was really to bring light to police brutality, I'm all for that. Bring light to it and let's come up with a good solution for it. Rioting in the streets and burning down neighborhoods is not a good solution, and it never was, as we've talked about before. Like, since the Rodney King, when I was young, I never understood that. And what would be different if they did go in, whether you look at Rodney King or some of the other police brutality incidents, and instead of burning down their neighborhoods, they went and stormed the police station. Would there be change then? Like you said, what do you accomplish by kidnapping the governor? But you don't accomplish anything by burning down your neighborhood either. And yeah, I think the difference between January 6th rioters and the BLM Antifa, particularly in Lake Kenosha, is the January 6th weren't busting up personal property. They weren't burning private property.
Or breaking the jaws of elderly men who were trying to put out the fire they set in his furniture store.
Right, exactly. So I think there's differences there, but at the end of the day, I'm not against people being upset at their government and protesting it and being angry about that. If there's a reason to be angry at your government, speak up, and speak up in the numbers. I think the government needs to be held a lot more accountable than the people do, particularly in a lot of the stuff that we just talked about throughout this show. And as I said, I mean, that's why the music of people like Tom McDonald and Oliver Anthony is starting to get those kind of views. These are independent musicians who are rocking it, and they're saying a message that really resonates with people. And that message is, we're being fucked. That's
right. And fuck around and find out, trying that in a small town, right?
Yeah, I guess I could have added that to
but
it.
I do want to make a clarification, because in general, I am anti-police brutality, but I'm not anti-police. But it comes from the perspective of the fact that I actually know a lot of police and had a long time talking to them. When I worked at I worked actually at a gas station. It was open 24 hours. And when you live in a town where there's nothing going on, the cops will get bored, and so they'll show up and talk to you. So you get a lot of perspective about where they're coming from. And unfortunately, they have a job that it's not very easy to do, and pull off and keep everybody safe.
Make it hard.
Well, right. And and it's just in the policy of the progressive left right now of this whole, well, let's just let everybody back out on the street. We should just get rid of prisons and bail, and then they want to abolish the police, but they haven't done anything to actually address the real problem in those communities. And I say this as someone who used to, basically grew up in the ghetto. You would call the cops, it would take them an hour to get to you when you live in these defunded cities.
Yes.
The violence of police, it was the least of your worries. It was the violence of the organized gang element, and they're only getting worse. We think we have it bad here. what's going on. I think it was El Salvador where the government just finally said, all right, that's enough, because the cartel, who will quite happily show up and fill the power vacuum, I might add, just got to a point where they were just outright murdering people on the street randomly, like they're the fucking Joker or something from a DC comic, right? Just randomly killing people, and the government finally said, "All right, well, yeah, that's enough of that," and they had to actually massively, mobilize to go after that cartel. People tend to forget that, you know, yes, police brutality sucks, but violent criminals also suck, and there's a hell of a lot more of them than there are bad cops, by an enormous margin.
They say an armed society is a polite society. Obviously, more people need to arm up and be trained, not just have them, but be trained on them. The thing is that solutions can be presented for a lot of this stuff, whether it be police brutality or anything else. And most of the time, people don't want to hear any solutions. Right now, on a separate conversation, but it's still out there because it's part of social media in the world. Another mass shooter happened recently, and again, the call for banning assault rifles was out there. And everybody said, the whole left is, if you're a Republican, you hate kids and you put guns over kids. And so, on a social media debate on Twitter, got in the debate because somebody wanted to know how, you would keep the schools safe. And the person on the left wouldn't answer the question. Their answer was ban assault weapons, as if that's it. That's all you have to do. And all of a sudden, mass shootings and kids would stop dying of gun violence. Obviously, facts have to be presented with real facts, not people with agenda. So whether you're talking about police brutality, mass shooters, election fraud, anything like that, real facts have to be out there. The news media, all that, really should be presenting real facts. They don't. But when you present solutions, and in this case, my solution was, as an example, I don't believe that we need the TSA for airport security. I think each airline should decide their own security and what they want and how they want to handle it. And so I took that same concept over to the schools, let the schools decide their security. School A might want to send teachers through training and have the teachers be armed. School B might want to have armed security hired and brought over there. School C might want to have both, the teachers be armed and armed security. And school D might just want to put up certain levels of entry points to where you can't get in unless you're buzzed in and have the reason to be there, and so on and so on. Now, I presented this argument, and the people on the left response back was your normal, well, you didn't really present anything that's real because schools can't afford it, and you just don't want to get rid of your guns because you hate kids.
No, none of that is ever rational. And honestly, for example, there were a couple of people who showed up during the Rittenhouse trial who had AR-15s. It was a black man and his daughter, and people were like, "Well, I'm sure that freaked you guys out." I'm like, "No, doesn't bother me at all. Probably a good idea. You have no idea what's going to happen outside that trial." They actually honestly believe that we think that maybe there's some citizens who shouldn't be allowed to have them. For me, like I've said, we've talked about it, like possibly people who have demonstrated severe mental illness, but really, other than that, I'm kind of a do not be infringed kind of guy. And it's like, I've mentioned this to you in conversation before, is like when you watch Westerns, like you said, armed society is a polite society. How far would somebody get if they just showed up at Tombstone with a rifle and just started shooting everybody?
Not very far.
Right. They'd be dead as fried chicken in about 3 seconds.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, we tend to blame the gun and not the shooters. We blame the cop and not the policies. You see what I'm saying? So we sit there and we say, bad cop. We don't blame that the politician has asked them to do all these things that they shouldn't be doing in a free society. You looked at the same thing when it comes to sports and the NFL. Like there's so many rules, and the refs have so many little distinctions on what qualifies as this or that. And what happens is a bad call happens, and we blame the ref. We don't blame the NFL for making a bad rule where it's hard to interpret, and it could be open for interpretation depending on this ref or that ref. And
we see that in wrestling all the time. Actually, international wrestling is terrible.
And you see that in law enforcement. I mean, it's most of the cops don't even know all the laws or know them themselves. You see these auditor videos now where everybody's correcting the cops. The cop coming up and saying, "You can't film here," and the person saying, "Of course I can. This has already been covered between Supreme Court and everywhere else. If it's a public place, public sidewalk, I can stand here and record." And the cop still wants to exert power and argue with them. This is a matter of bad policies where they've just got too many rules and too much to think about, and they don't know how to interpret it all, or not follow them all, but they don't know them all themselves. And it's the same thing with the guns. It's so easy to blame the scary AR-15 for something, even though when you look at the statistics, it's handguns that are more involved in the crime than the rifle. And so, you go over to these January 6 rioters, which is what this show's about, and it's just real easy to blame it on Trump only. And, it's just about Trump and extreme MAGA supporters, and not look at the deep-rooted cause of how people are feeling in this country right now, particularly when it comes to elections and voter fraud.
And even on the left side of that, like I remember very distinctly Andrew Yang during one of the Democratic primary debates saying, "You guys need to understand that your problem is not Donald Trump. Your problem is what happened to people to put them in a position where they wanted somebody like Donald Trump. Like, your problem is not, if you think that you can just get rid of Donald Trump and all your problems go away, then you don't really understand what's going on." And during the course of him getting prepared for his campaign, he traveled all over the country talking to different people, and that's how he got a handle on it. But they don't really care about the people, And again, like we mentioned earlier, I think the big reason why they wanted to be rid of Trump was war. And if he had given them all the wars they wanted, they probably would have just not had any problem with him at all. Were you going to read that?
No, I just threw it up there while we talk so people can still see it and everything. I'll read it. I'll put it back up there. The history.
No, I was just wondering if that's true.
Yeah, THX 1138, the history of policing in the U.S. It has nothing to do with protecting the public. It's bringing order to disorder, according to the tycoons of industry whose idea it was. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for that, and there's a lot of truth in that when you look at it. When you look at what the news said about the January 6th people that got the sentencing, they kept saying, well, they had intent. They had intent to do violence. They had intent to commit a crime. You can't punish somebody for 15 years because you believe they had intent. And our law enforcement works the same way with a lot of the traffic laws that are out there, and it's usually under, we're doing it to keep you safe. You did this, you had intent. Obviously if you drove faster than the speed limit, your intent was to hurt somebody. You can't do it that way. That's not how it works. You can't punish somebody for victimless crimes. And that is the nature of most policing right now. There's a lot of victimless crime that goes on. You think about a California stop, because you didn't stop for 5 seconds, you rolled through. It doesn't matter if you can clearly see every angle and see that nobody else was even at the stop sign. You didn't stop. So we have the right to take your money, give you a fine and take your money. This causes discontent. This causes people to be pissed. Nobody wants to lose $150+ because they didn't hurt anybody or do anything wrong, So yeah, I mean, I have to agree with that the policing isn't really about your protection and keeping you safe. It's more about money and power.
What I would say is that unless you can present, because again, like Fresco, most anarcho-communists, for example, they're all anti-cop too, but Fresco points out that society has to evolve past the need for them. And they have to give some kind of reliable answer as to what they're going to suggest to replace them. Antifa is stupid enough to believe that they are going to replace the cops, that they are going to be able to fight the cartel.
Right.
And, you need to have some kind of plan in place for what's going to take over. And I don't agree with obviously all of the anarcho-capitalist solutions of like, well, we'll just all buy our private security and stuff like that. I don't think that would work, but I also don't think that a big group of kids wearing black hoodies, who think they're tough because again, they throw bottles at cops who've been ordered not to shoot them, is going to be the solution to MS-13 or the other violent gangs that will happily try to take over this country if we didn't have a police force. Is there going to be reform? Obviously, yes, everybody up to and including the police themselves that I've talked to would love to have reform. There was actually a couple of really great links that I used to give out. One of them was Jocko Willink on Joe Rogan. And for those of you who don't know who he is, Jocko was a Navy SEAL. And he pointed out that, police should be probably spending about 30% of their time on training all the time. There's no money for that in any way that any of these police are actually set up, right? And then
Well,
he
we always
brought
talk
up a
about
different.
there's no money for stuff. That was brought up with protecting the kids with security at school. There's no money. That just means we don't want to address the abuse of money, the mishandling of money, the amount of money that is spent. I mean, the Pentagon loses billions of dollars. It becomes a news report.
Well,
the Pentagon misreplaced
it's a separate rabbit hole. It's a separate rabbit hole. Let me finish my point.
Well, the money's
if
there.
You want
if it's
police
handled right.
that can, if police, but that's just it though. It's not a priority to the people who usually run these things, which is why people, if you want police reform, instead of burning down your cities, maybe you should vote for sheriff. Maybe you should actually care about that election. It was set up that way for a reason. You want to change policies, put pressure on your mayor when they're appointing chief of police. Like those are the systems that are in place that nobody's even using.
Well, I agree.
Point,
I would
right.
say 100%. I agree with that.
So then you couple that with, and again, just let me finish here. So like Jocko went over in detail about the different things that would need to change about the way that police are trained, how their training is maintained, which it usually is not at all. And then Joe Rogan had on another guest who's literally a police psychologist, and her whole job is to teach police, first of all, psychological de-escalation tactics, but also to help them with their trauma. And she pointed out that she usually only gets to talk to officers maybe 30 minutes a year, like each precinct, because they don't prioritize that. So as a consequence, you get these cops, they're in a profession that fucks people up. Like even if they were good cops, it's a profession that does real changes to your body and the way it works, particularly the constantly being up on adrenaline, for example. The same reason why so many people come back from war and they have hard time dealing with civilian life, right? So then, then we defund them, so there's less of them. So now they're all working overtime, which just makes this problem even worse, right? So I understand where you're coming from. Obviously, you're an anarchist libertarian. What I'm getting at is that you need to have a plan in place to be able to deal with what will inevitably happen. If you can't just throw a lever, I guess would be the point, and go,
that was my point as well. I mean, with all the other solutions, you can't throw a lever and do it, but you've got to address things down to the core and not just blanketly say, well, we can't do that because there's no money in it or something like that. I mean, that's
right. And that wasn't the only point I was making either. They need to be prepared to do their job. If you want, and you get what you paid for. If somebody's not giving them that money, then hold the people accountable who aren't getting it to them, and hold the sheriffs accountable who, like, again, we point that out all the time. People don't even think about it. They just go, I guess the sheriff's getting elected. They usually have no idea who the sheriff is. They also don't know who any of their judges are, right? They unless you are going before a judge, you usually have no idea who your judges are. Nobody bothers to investigate which judges hold positions that you like and which ones you don't, right? So that's what I'm saying is that the things that already exist within the system that were set up that way for a reason are also not being followed. And some of that is on the citizens themselves. If you're not like actively looking into who your mayor is going to be, if you're not looking into who your county commissioner is going to be, if you're not looking into who your sheriff and your local judges are going to be, it's kind of at that point, I mean, like you haven't even tried the beginning of what would be necessary to reform, police and prisons and all that stuff, and when you bring this up to BLM, they don't want anything to do with that conversation.
Agreed. It's the same point I had on the left about fixing the schools and the kids being murdered at schools. One of my suggestions was obviously end gun-free zones. Like, let's get rid of the soft targets. They don't want to hear those kind of things. They don't want to address them. That's not even a possibility to them. And another thing that you're pointing out, it's a lot easier to do it on that level. It's a lot easier to handle politics on your local level than it is on a national level. And that is where people should focus more. Unfortunately, as we started off the show, or some point on the show, we talked about how people hold the office of the presidency as this huge big deal and pay attention to that so much and worry about Donald Trump or Joe Biden as compared to who their mayor is and who their city councilman is and their sheriff is, and so on and so on. Governing, and particularly in the form of liberty, is much easier done on a small scale at a city level than it would be at a state or federal level, without a doubt. And, again, as I pointed out, I think we're at a line in the sand where there's many of us who want that local level to come back and be where we focus on, and this whole group of people who want this big centralized federal government to run your lives and tell you what to do. I mean, look how they flipped out when the Supreme Court overturned the Roe versus Wade ruling. And again, they didn't acknowledge the fact that this was based on the 10th Amendment, that the Supreme Court said that this is a states' rights issue. They didn't give a shit. They don't want it a states' right issue. They want the federal government to be the be all end all and say, no, you got to allow this or not allow this. They don't want to hear that about your local level and handling this or handling that. So I think we're at that line in the sand where you're either for this big power centralized government or you're not. And inside that or you're not group is probably conservative, libertarians, anarchists. Inside the we want the big, powerful central government is a lot of your Democrats and your communists and socialists and people like that. And
as long as they agree with them, yeah. But but that's why I keep pointing out, for example, Russell Brand, huge channel, guy's an anarcho-communist, but he talks constantly about a decentralized system of communities that are locally, governed by the people that are actually in them, right? All of these systems work better if people are more conscious. Like, I don't know if you remember him. I can't even remember his name. I used to have a co-host on V Radio, and he would talk about how things were
in Europe.
Good? I can't remember his name.
Jacob.
Yeah, right. Because we had kind of a weird falling out at the end. But anyway, he pointed out, for example, that if you don't vote, I think it was in Switzerland, they fine you. Like, you're not allowed to not vote, right? And they have a referendum system set up so that as a consequence, if the voters don't like what their government is doing, they have a little bit more power to do something about it. But the point is that we have disengaged from our system, and then we don't understand why it isn't working right. We if we're gonna say to ourselves, okay, well, we don't want the big government in the way, but we also are not going to be responsible for our local government, then what do you think's going to happen? Nothing good's going to come of that. That's why I said, that's why I said for any of these systems to work, people have to have a value shift.
I mean, I know libertarians
and that includes
are highly focused on local governments and the local elections. Right. They have to be. They don't have the money and resources to focus on the national ones anyway, which, as we've discussed in a previous show, I think that's a good thing. Like, it allows the focus to where it should be. You're really spreading freedom at that level where, you need to be spreading it. Because you're not going to get it. The government, a central government, a federal government always wants power, is always corrupt. And that's always going to be the case. I don't think you'll ever have a benevolent federal, large centralized government.
Right. Well, yeah. And then, we've talked about this concept for years. I think, though, you would have to acknowledge, as I pointed out, I had a friend who used to go to Black Lives Matter protests and events, and because he was a black person, they would say stuff in front of him that they may not always say openly. And I asked him who he found to be in the leftist version of abolish the police, and he's like, well, they usually come in two varieties. I was like, well, what are they? He's like, well, either these kids who are utterly naive about crime, like they don't know anything about my life in the ghetto, they've never seen it drive by, and he literally said they think they know the hood because they drove through my neighborhood once to go to a nightclub or something. He's like, they don't understand at all what it's like to live here, and then and I said, so what's the other group? He's like, criminals, and I chuckled for him. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, literally criminals, people that I've grew up with that are lifelong criminals. Of course they want to abolish them. And you see it because what are they doing in these areas where they keep passing laws to go easy on shoplifters, for example? What happens in these places where, like the district attorney, who is the son of two members of the communist Weather Underground terrorist group, he became a DA and he just kept letting all the criminals back out. And then eventually the people of San Francisco had to recall him because he was just going to keep doing it. So
you can, I mean, not have the government incarcerate and punish people that are shoplifting and stuff, or let them back out, as long as you don't punish the store owner for doing his means necessary to keep that shoplifting from happening again. You don't really see gun stores being held up and robbed that much. There's a reason for that. Everybody who works behind the counter is packing. It's the same thing. Like if I owned a convenience store in a place where the politicians were allowing people to come in and rob you and not do anything about it, I, as a private owner, would take care of that myself. And, God forbid that they try to come and punish me for it. We'll assume that they won't, that they're fair across the board. Like, okay, so they tried to come in and rob me. We put it down. All fair, all's good. All is well that ends well, right? So,
but I would take that back to the same situation I saw when two Antifa cells were beefing with each other, because one of the Antifa cells had a member that accused another one of the Antifa cells of sexual harassment, and they had no way to figure out who was telling the truth. So it was really just going to come down to a couple of black blocs fighting each other in the streets to determine who really did it. Like the incident that you just described makes perfect sense if that's what actually happened. What if you just happened to be a show owner, store owner, and you just, got into a dispute with someone about something personal and decided to shoot him? Who determines that actually is or is not what happened? That's why I said I'm all for less state power, but you got to have something to replace that system. Who's going to do the forensic analysis to find out if you're telling the truth?
I was doing my example based off your example. I mean, again, having said that, now, I keep reading the comments, and I think I saw somebody say that before we end the show, which needs to end soon, that, I think we had somebody else. Very few people in our comments and our listeners are supportive of the sentencing that happened to these Proud Boys. So I'm surprised when a few come in and said that they're happy about it. I have seen some comments still that saying all the rioters and all the riots are stupid. I think the way that almost they all went down, of course, I think burning your neighborhood, wrecking private businesses is stupid. I don't think being pissed at the government and wanting your voice to be heard is stupid. So I think there's a separation there. And I think, January 6th is not the same thing as Kenosha. What happened at the Capitol, I don't think is in any way the same thing as Kenosha. So you have to separate those two in my mind and look at them from that point of view. But I think the cause is the same thing. People are fed up and pissed, and one side, it was fed up and pissed about what was perceived police brutality. Another side, it's election fraud and, the government and all the fake news and everything. So, I'm not happy with the sentencing that happened with the Proud Boys. I think that it's ridiculous. I'm not surprised, the government wants to set an example of anybody who questions their authority. But I think, at the end of the day, if you're happy about it, you're definitely not on the pro-freedom side.
And for me, I think I regret that before we did this topic, I really should have looked at it more. I was just busy, literally right up until the moment of the show. But the only Proud Boy / conservative who showed up at January 6th that I knew enough about was the QAnon shaman. There were so many people that were there. I mean, I would want to go over every case individually, but in general, my policy is violent protest is not okay. Don't do that. So I would want to look at it before I formulated and made a statement. But in general, I will also say that the absurd overreaction to January 6th, while literally just completely setting a blind eye to anything that happened before it, as far as rioting is concerned, is just asinine.
Right.
And that's why I said hindsight is always 20/20 in my documentary, was just to try to point out, literally there's a BLM activist in New York who said, there will be riots, there will be fires, and there will be bloodshed. He just directly threatens that if he doesn't get what he wants from the mayor of New York, that's what's going to happen. Right. I have all kinds of recordings of people saying that. At one point, a Biden supporter says to a BLM riot, hey, keep it peaceful. And then one of the Karens in the BLM rioter group said, you're asking for peaceful protest. That's white supremacy.
I'm glad I'm not a Karen.
Well, right. But you get
My
the
name's
point.
not
It's just, the notion that it's okay when they do it, but not okay when another group does it has just gotten to the point where it's just so stupid. Like I
Right.
just, and then they lie about, like it's the same thing about what they're, I mean, and this is a perfect example, and I think we can pretty much wrap it up with this, but it's like the people, like, remember you were mentioning earlier about the kind of people who are so happy that these people got those harsh sentences. They're the
Yeah.
same people who still think that Kyle Rittenhouse should be in jail for the rest of his life.
They're exactly the same people. They actually
Right.
are. I mean,
Right.
go
Given
back to
all the
their
same
tweets and find
facts,
that. Yep.
even admitting to all the same facts, just on the basis that they believed that he went there with intent, which I did a video specifically about that because he literally was giving medical attention to BLM rioters right after they pepper sprayed him. So if he was there to attack people, he'd have done it a lot different. I mean, if you wanted to be a kid with an AR-15 and kill some people, in Kenosha, just go sit out in the dark somewhere and cap some people. It would have been really easy, right? Especially the way they were just walking around like lemmings. And I say it like that because that's what it was like after watching hundreds of hours of irrelevant footage to try to get relevant things. Literally hurting myself. I hurt myself sitting in my chair so long. Anyway, the point is that those kinds of people would have wanted anybody, prosecuted, and it's because we've become so tribal now that the truth doesn't matter to them anymore. They want anybody to go to jail that they don't agree with. They want people who, disagree with them to be, like I remember there was the viral clip for a while when they were it was on I want to say it was on MSNBC, but they had a panel together and they brought on some expert and he's like, well, if they're going to keep reporting fake news, it's time to try to arrest some people and put them in jail. I was like, what? Like, it's like you want to arrest journalists now? I'm like, they don't understand what they're walking into, and unfortunately, the facts are optional. Those people would have if it was a peaceful protest. Those people would have still wanted those people.
Right. I guess, everybody listening, if you haven't figured out, if we don't watch a clock, Neil and I can talk all night long and you guys will be up until 4 a.m. listening to us bullshit about every topic on the planet. But at some point we have to end our show and go. And I think we've reached that point. As always, Neil, it's been a great show. I love our listeners and I love the active chat and how everybody's involved in that. I say it every week as we end the show and I mean it. It's great. This is one of the things I look forward to is the active chat that we have and all the comments that we get and the interaction that happens there. So at this point, if you're not telling your friends and family about this show, shame on you. You guys need to get out there. Neil and I are shadow banned and we can't gain any traction without you guys. So, you got to start, retweeting our show, posting it on Facebook, telling your friends and family about it. They all deserve the dose of liberty that we give people. Mostly what I give people. I don't know what Neil does over there all day long.
Right, of course.
But no, again, we appreciate you guys and we appreciate the support. Obviously, as I always say, if you have not liked my YouTube channel yet, hop off of Neil's channel and go over to A Liberty Unleashed and give me that subscribe button. On both of them, you can smash the like button to show that you liked our episode. And I don't know what else to say. I really think they need to get out there and tell everybody about our show. And that's about all I can say about that.
Well, if you like this kind of content, folks, and you want it to succeed, then you basically are going to have to share it because even if you can't afford to financially support the shows, then you should definitely share them, subscribe to them, and don't settle with that. There's a reason why I have a Discord and a Facebook and a Telegram, and I'm on Rumble and Odyssey and everything else is because of the fact that YouTube does a really terrible job of, well, people report to me constantly. Somehow I got unsubscribed. I didn't get a notification for this broadcast. So that's why I suggest you go to hy.page/vradio, and there you'll find all of my links to things like Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, but also my Discord channel where you guys can come and have conversations with people from diverse, opinions. The main rule is just don't, engage in personal attack. But you're allowed to be conservative, whatever, left, this or whatever, as long as you can manage to not call people names. You're free to go ahead and have that conversation there. If you want, Right. If you want to, if you do want to support me financially, I am in kind of a tough spot at the moment, but I haven't been pushing it too hard. But like, you can support me on Patreon, Subscribestar, or PayPal. If you really want to get me through Venmo or something, just reach out to me individually, and we'll have a chance to do that. So, but also check out my archives. I've noticed that a lot of you guys, a lot of the things we talked about tonight come from previous shows. Maybe we should try to wade through the North Virginia Patriot stuff and see if there's anything that we think people might like to listen to nowadays. But you and I have been doing this for a really long time, so there's got to be like content that they might find interesting, and as far as perspectives. But we've had a
Yeah, I was
Yep.
going to say, let us know if there's a topic you want us to discuss and talk about. We're always willing to take some suggestions from the audience, and also, I think everybody needs to be like Tam and Daisy Girl. Be like Tam and Daisy Girl and tell everybody about it. Share the links. Be like Tam. But yeah, no, we definitely take suggestions on topics and content that you'd like to hear. Again, I keep trying to get Neil to do a show on cryptocurrency and decentralized finance. And he's not sure that's something you guys would want to hear about or listen to. So if I'm right, let us know. If Neil's right, no, forget about it. Neil's never right.
Right, I'm always left. Left libertarian.
Right.
So what we could do is review. We could review The Anarchist, because crypto comes up in that documentary series.
Okay, I will watch The Anarchist so we can review it. I mean, I know
that
people
way you can
who were there.
force the crypto issue into the conversation. Well, there you go. That would be great. And I think you'd mentioned maybe possibly bringing someone on who was there at Anarcho Poco and all of that was going on. I do want to ask THX, because I was not aware of this, that Jeff Censored had told people about me. If you could give me some more context to that, I would really appreciate it, THX, because I just looked up his channel. I was like, do I know this guy? Like, I couldn't remember. And super chat from John Jackson. Thanks for the show, John, as always, here on my channel. And if you have not subscribed to Liberty Unleashed, you really should, because any second now, Brian's going to do content on Liberty Unleashed.
It's true.
Any second.
It's true.
Right.
Yes, it is
true. Full disclosure of UFOs is about as likely. However, it's more likely now, right? Because we're talking about UFOs, right? So, but in any case, yes, he's going to be doing some stuff. Bring it. I mean, have you had any ideas about what you're working on, or what?
Yeah, I work on a lot of things that have to do with the Bill of Rights. So, Second Amendment, 10th Amendment, as we talked about, decentralized finance, anything that really gets the government out of your life in any way. Tonight, this weekend, I was really out working on the garden a lot. Do you have a garden, Neil?
Well, I have a damaged spine, so no.
All right. Well, I mean,
it would be really, really hard for me to mind a garden when I can't get out of my bed without help. So.
Well, I'm hoping by next year to have chickens and possibly quail. Quail eggs are good, and quail are
quail
good to
is
eat.
so tasty.
Yes, quail is tasty. And my point there is to move towards homesteading. We do, don't tell the federal government, but I do reloading and stuff of my own. So when we go to the gun range, we find brass on the ground. So if you're looking to think about the kind of content that I would talk about, again, it's anything that you can do that, gets the government out of your life, supports the Bill of Rights. Homesteading would be one of those things. I mean, I only got a small garden, so I can't call myself a homesteader yet. But like I said, I'm working there. And the amount of money I put into soil and seeds and building the garden, I can't say that it saved me money over buying vegetables from the grocery store. But what I can tell you, Neil, since you don't have a garden, is when you get those vegetables from your garden, it tastes totally different than the grocery store. The kids.
Oh no, I was a farmer when I was a kid. I remember distinctly going out into the garden and plucking and eating the cherry tomatoes.
Oh yeah, the kids do that here. We get the raspberries we don't have right now, but the strawberries they were doing that with. When they bite into a tomato, they often say, "Wow, this is good. Where'd you get it?" And then we say, "Our garden," because they can tell the difference between the store bought and those. So, I think the reward there is one, the work that you put into it, that's kind of rewarding, and two, the flavor of the vegetable is great. But of course, I get my own seeds then. I don't have to keep rebuying them. I can get the seeds out of everything I got and then use them for the following year. And
Don't tell Monsanto.
exactly, and I'm not going to if you don't. So
No,
yeah,
I
that's
won't.
the kind of stuff you would expect from Liberty Unleashed, to talk about all those kind of things, guns,
And by the way, Monsanto, if you are listening to this stream, go to hell.
yeah, that
Anyway.
too. What Neil said.
Right, what I said. Continue, Ryan.
No, that's it. That's to answer your question.
All
That's what we
right.
get from Liberty Unleashed. I mean, it says it in its name. It's all about liberty, and that's what we do here.
More specific, liberty that has been unleashed.
Yeah, it's going to be unleashed all over you.
Not just like all over you.
It gets sloppy.
Right, but that's the reason he's got the webcam, because he's going to unleash his liberty all over you.
Yeah.
But you have to tip him for that. Thanks everybody for tuning in to V Radio, guys. I still have some more content I've been kind of on and off working on. I've just been cramming for some certifications for something I'm going to be doing later. Remember, guys, like and subscribe, ring the bell, share this content everywhere you can, and thanks for tuning in.
Thank you, guys. Have a great night.